EF0. The neighbors called it just wind. Technically, they were not wrong. The tornado that passed through the eastern edge of a small Illinois town carried EF0 winds and was on the ground for less than 40 seconds. Total contact with the earth, about a quarter mile. The local news mentioned it in passing. 3 paragraphs. Buried beneath the radar graphic, the family whose porch roof landed in their swimming pool might have chosen different words. EF0 tornadoes carry winds between 105 and 137 kilometers per hour, which sounds like a number you should be able to reason about. Cars travel at that speed. You have rolled down a highway at that pace and felt nothing alarming. But a car moves through still air in one direction. A tornado is that speed rotating, pulling objects into its column and throwing them horizontally, concentrating force in a contact zone sometimes only a few meters wide. The result is what researchers call selective destruction. On a single block, 3 trees are gone, 1 standing. 1 roof stripped, the neighbors untouched. A fence gone, the mailbox left. It looks arbitrary because from the outside it is completely arbitrary. The rotation passes over what it passes over. EF0s are the most common tornado on Earth, accounting for roughly half of all confirmed annual touchdowns in the United States. In Kansas, in Oklahoma, in parts of the Gulf South, they are treated the way a beach town treats a minor wave surge, something you clean up and do not discuss at length. There is something almost insulting about EF0 damage. The storm did not commit. The funnel touched, dragged, lifted, and yet the porch roof is in the swimming pool. The tree that survived 3 decades of real storms is in 3 pieces on the lawn. The storm did not linger. It was barely noticed. EF0s also kill people every year, almost never by wind speed alone. A branch at 110 kilometers per hour carries enough kinetic energy to punch through glass, through drywall, through whoever is on the wrong side of both. The Enhanced Fujita Scale rates tornadoes by structural damage. It was not designed for what happens when the projectile used to be a tree. The family filed an insurance claim. The local news moved on to something else. Life continued, which is exactly why EF0 events get underestimated so consistently. Here is the first question that nobody has fully answered, and it will quietly run underneath everything that follows. Certain EF0 tornadoes produce damage indistinguishable from EF1. Same measured wind speed, completely different results on isolated structures. Nobody has a clean explanation for why. Not yet. But when the wind speed climbs and the damage starts talking back, the question stops being academic. EF1. The fire chief who surveyed EF1 damage in Harrisburg, Illinois, the morning after said something engineers in tornado country still repeat. The houses that held together were the ones somebody built right. The houses that didn't, that wasn't the tornado's fault. He was being precise. EF1 tornadoes, with winds from 138 to 177 kilometers per hour, rarely defeat well-engineered structures. What they defeat is the gap between what building codes require and what actually got built. Across millions of homes constructed before modern wind standards, in regions where tornado risk was historically underweighted, that gap is everywhere. A roof fails in EF1 winds the way a chain breaks. Not at the strongest link, but at the one quietly failing for years. The soffit edge lifts, pressure gets underneath. The deck separates from the trusses. The trusses go. Then the walls, which the roof was holding in lateral alignment, began to lean. The whole sequence takes seconds. Mobile homes are removed at EF1 intensity, not damaged, removed. A fact that has driven emergency shelter policy debates for decades, largely without resolution. The shelters cost money. The communities often do not have it. The gap persists. Average warning time before an EF1 hits a mobile home community runs around 13 minutes, which sounds like enough time until you factor in how long it takes a person to first believe the siren is real. That is the part nobody engineered around. Belief. People hear the siren and look at the sky first. They wait for visual confirmation. In EF1 conditions, that hesitation costs a roof. At higher intensity, it costs considerably more. Every EF1 tornado is a kind of audit of infrastructure, of inequality, of who planned for this and who simply could not afford to. The communities with the highest EF1 death rates are almost never the ones with the best-built homes. That is not a coincidence. It is a policy failure with a decades-long paper trail. That mystery from EF0, why some tornadoes outperform their measured wind speed on isolated structures, starts sharpening here. Damage surveyors noticed the anomalous destruction was never random. It followed narrow, linear corridors within the larger path. Tight lines of elevated damage, sometimes only 10 meters wide, cutting through the broader destruction zone. Something inside the tornado was doing that, something too small and too brief to name at this level. Surveyors had finally found the pattern. What they still could not explain was what was creating it, and at the next level, it stops hiding. EF2. There is a house in Tuscaloosa, Alabama that survived the 2011 EF4 tornado with minor roof damage. 12 meters away, there is a concrete slab where a house used to be. That story recurs at every level of this scale in every major outbreak in documented history. For a long time, the explanation was construction quality. Better house, better outcome. That explanation is true. It is also incomplete. Winds from 178 to 217 kilometers per hour. This is where well-constructed homes begin losing exterior walls, not roofs first. Walls, entire framing sections stripped to the studs or gone entirely. Brick veneers relocated to the yard. Loaded freight rail cars rolled from their tracks. Trees do not snap at EF2. They get pulled out, root systems and all, like a tooth extracted from soil they occupied for decades and placed somewhere else. The damage path at EF2 has a different character than what came before. The tornado has been on the ground long enough to settle into a rhythm. At EF0 and EF1, the storm is still finding itself. At EF2, it has been decided. Large organized tornadoes generate secondary rotations within their primary circulation. Suction vortices, tight subcirculations orbiting the main funnel core like electrons around a nucleus, spinning considerably faster than the parent tornado. The house that was leveled while the neighbors survived was not a story about lumber grades. It was about which 12-meter corridor the suction vortex crossed and exactly when. This is what was producing those narrow damage lines in the EF1 surveys. The suction vortex was already operating, just smaller, faster, harder to catch. Not enough energy yet to make the difference obvious. At EF2, it does. A second question opens here, separate from the suction vortex entirely. Moore, Oklahoma was struck by violent tornadoes in 1999, 2003, and 2013. Why the same town repeatedly? Partly geography, partly random storm motion, and partly something researchers are still working to quantify. Whether persistent atmospheric corridors make certain regions statistically more prone to repeated events. No tidy answer exists for either question right now. But at the next level, the consequences of leaving them unanswered stop being theoretical. EF3. 158 people died in Joplin on May 22, 2011. A warning was issued 16 minutes before the tornado hit downtown. 16 minutes with a functioning infrastructure, modern Doppler radar, multiple meteorologists on air. The warning was real. The lead time was real. The death toll was the highest from a single U.S. tornado since 1947. Why? Research identified a pattern called false alarm desensitization. Communities that receive frequent warnings without catastrophic outcomes begin treating the siren as background noise. They watch the sky first. They wait for the funnel to become visible before they move. The Joplin tornado gave them approximately 45 seconds from visual confirmation to impact. People ignored the warning because every previous warning had not killed them. The brain learns from experience faster than it learns from statistics. The warning system was designed around physics. The failure point was always psychology. EF3 winds run from 218 to 266 kilometers per hour. Exterior walls of well-constructed homes stripped entirely. Cars were lifted and thrown hundreds of meters. Trees debarked, not by wind directly, but by debris already moving at speed, turning the air into a horizontal sandblaster, built from everything the tornado collected over the previous kilometers of its path. The debris field of an EF3 is where investigators stop being able to identify what they are looking at. Objects that were furniture, appliances, structural framing, personal belongings become fragments without recognizable origin. A child's shoe, a section of something that was once a wall, a photograph, somehow intact, of people nobody on the survey team can identify. The investigation becomes archaeological. At EF3, the suction vortices become visible. Storm chasers describe brief, bright flashes inside the dark mass of the funnel, sub-vortices catching light through the rain wrapping around them. For years, nobody was entirely sure what they were looking at. Once researchers understood, it reframed almost everything about how violent tornado damage distributes across a path. The EF3 rating describes average conditions at the contact zone. The sub-vortex passing over your location delivers something the rating was never built to capture. The same mechanism behind those narrow EF0 and EF1 damage corridors surveyors could not explain, now operating at a scale where the consequence is not a missing shingle, but a missing wall. The warning problem compounds here in a way that has nothing to do with radar quality. The wider and more intense a tornado becomes, the more likely it is to be rain-wrapped, no visible funnel. Just a rotation signature on radar requiring trained interpretation, and a community already primed by false alarms to hesitate. At EF3, when those two things collide, the warning window does not shrink. It disappears. 16 minutes was not enough in Joplin. At the next level, the storm does not give you 16 minutes. It does not negotiate at all. EF4, December 10th, 2021. Mayfield, Kentucky, 10:17 p.m. A candle factory with 110 workers on the overnight shift took a direct hit. The building was substantially destroyed. 8 workers died. The others survived largely because of decisions made in the final minutes before impact. Lying flat, moving to interior areas, covering themselves with whatever was available. A partially destroyed industrial building, at night, in December. The variable separating the living from the dead was not construction rating. It was what individual people chose to do in the last 90 seconds. The tornado stayed on the ground for over 265 kilometers, crossing parts of 4 states. It killed 57 people in Kentucky alone, more tornado deaths in a single December than the state had recorded across the entire modern data record. December, night, Kentucky. None of that fits the mental model most people carry about tornado risk. The surprise was part of the death toll. EF4 winds run from 267 to 322 kilometers per hour. At this intensity, the question of sheltering inside a wood frame home without going underground stops being a nuanced engineering conversation. The physics exceeds what residential construction was ever designed to handle. The only consistent answer is underground, specifically engineered, anchored underground shelter. Not a basement with a mattress over the door, not an interior bathroom, underground. The cost of building that into every tornado-prone home in America has never been met with the political will to require it. That gap runs through every EF4 after-action report ever written. Inside a large EF4 tornado, suction vortices can independently carry winds approaching EF5 threshold. You can be standing in the EF4 damage corridor and experience EF5 conditions for the seconds it takes one subcirculation to sweep across your location. The formal rating reflects the average. The suction vortex does not do averages. That question from EF0, why certain structures take damage beyond what the wind speed should produce, this is the answer. Same mechanism, much larger scale. And the more question returns. The town was rebuilt after 1999, rebuilt again after 2003. A different explanation sits beneath the repeated strikes than simple bad luck. More occupies a region where wind shear, surface instability, and moisture convergence overlap with unusual frequency. The geography does not change. The storms keep finding it. Here is what does not get said at conferences. Those atmospheric ingredients continue to appear across this region with remarkable consistency. The EF5 is not necessarily the worst version of what Moore has experienced. It may simply be the worst version we have measured so far, and measured is doing a lot of work in that sentence. EF5. On May 3, 1999, a mobile Doppler radar unit locked onto a tornado southwest of Bridge Creek, Oklahoma. The measured wind speed was 486 kilometers per hour. The team rechecked, ran diagnostics. The number stood. 486 kilometers per hour is the highest wind speed ever recorded at or near the Earth's surface, faster than the cruising speed of some military aircraft. When published, it produced a specific kind of scientific silence, not disbelief, but recalibration, a quiet revision of what the word tornado had been understood to mean. The Bridge Creek Moore tornado killed 36 people and injured 583 across a 61-kilometer track. Moore was struck again in 2003, then again by a confirmed EF5 on May 20th, 2013. That tornado hit Plaza Towers Elementary School during school hours. 7 children drowned in a flooded area of the building. The school had no purpose-built tornado shelter. A state legislator introduced a bill requiring underground shelters in all new Oklahoma school construction. It passed. Federal standards requiring the same across tornado-prone states do not currently exist. The conversation about why resurfaces after every major event. Then it quiets again. A community rebuilt, buried its dead, passed a law, and the national policy conversation moved on. Above 322 kilometers per hour with no defined upper limit. The EF5 is the scale's last word. Well-built homes are not leveled at this intensity. They are redistributed. The structure that stood on a foundation becomes airborne material, impacting everything downwind. In several documented cases, the topsoil itself was stripped from the ground, not the grass, the soil, leaving exposed subgrade that looked like a different planet. Suction vortex winds inside an EF5 remain unmeasured at the direct source. No instrument placed at ground level inside one has survived to transmit. What exists is inference, damage signatures requiring forces the rated average cannot explain, steel deformed past what the parent tornado's measured winds should produce. In several EF5 events, the radar signature was so anomalous that meteorologists briefly questioned whether they were seeing instrument error. The storm was larger than their systems were calibrated to expect. The scale stops here, the atmosphere does not.